The Thames flows dark and cold beneath a leaden sky, its surface broken by the oars of countless wherries and the hulls of merchant vessels laden with goods from distant shores. This is London in the 17th century, a metropolis unlike any other in England, a city approaching 500,000 souls pressed together in a labyrinth of narrow streets and timber-framed buildings that lean precariously toward one another. The air carries the smell of coal smoke, river mud, and the constant press of humanity engaged in the endless work of commerce and survival. To walk these streets is to enter a world balanced between medieval tradition and the forces of a new age, a city that would witness revolution, devastation, and rebirth within the span of a single lifetime. By the early 1600s, London had grown beyond the ancient walls that once contained it, sprawling westward toward Westminster and eastward along the riverbanks where wharves and warehouses multiplied to serve an expanding empire of trade. The city drew people from every corner of England and beyond, merchants and craftsmen, laborious and servants, drawn by opportunity or driven by necessity into the grinding machinery of urban life. This was not a city of grand boulevards or orderly planning, but rather an organic accumulation of centuries, each generation building upon the ruins and foundations of those who came before. The River Thames formed the central artery of this living organism, a highway more vital than any road. From dawn until the last light faded, the river teemed with traffic. Barges heavy with coal from Newcastle moved slowly upstream, their crews straining at the oars against the current. Merchant ships from the continent and beyond anchored in the Pool of London, their holds disgorging timber from the Baltic, wine from France, spices from the East Indies. Wherries darted between the larger vessels like water beetles, ferrying passengers from bank to bank. The Thames was more than transportation. It was commerce itself made liquid, the medium through which London's wealth flowed and upon which its power ultimately rested. Spanning this vital waterway stood one of the most remarkable structures in all of Europe, Old London Bridge. To call it merely a bridge understates its nature entirely. This was a street suspended above water, a continuous neighborhood of houses and shops built so densely upon the ancient stone piers that a traveler crossing from Southwark to the city might scarcely realize they passed over water at all. The buildings rose 4 and 5 stories high, their upper floors jutting out over the roadway below, creating a dim tunnel through which carts and pedestrians jostled for passage. Merchants traded from ground-floor shops while families lived their entire lives above, children born in rooms suspended above the Thames. The bridge's massive stone piers narrowed the river's flow, creating currents that made passage beneath treacherous for river traffic. In the coldest winters, these same piers could obstruct the flow enough to contribute to the Thames freezing, transforming the river into a temporary street of ice where Londoners gathered for frost fairs, roasting meat over open fires and skating across the frozen surface of their city's greatest highway. For centuries, this bridge remained the only permanent crossing of the Thames in central London, a bottleneck through which all land traffic between the city and the southern reaches had to pass to the west of the bridge. Cheapside served as the principal commercial street where goldsmiths and mercers maintained shops whose wares attracted the wealthy and powerful. But Cheapside was more than a marketplace. It served as a stage for royal pageantry and public spectacle. When Marie de Medici arrived in London in 1638, her procession moved through Cheapside beneath triumphal arches erected for the occasion. The street transformed into a theatre of diplomatic display. Further west stood Westminster, a complex of buildings that housed the machinery of government and the ancient rituals of monarchy. The old palace of Westminster contained Parliament, that increasingly assertive body whose conflicts with the Crown would soon plunge England into civil war. Westminster Hall, with its magnificent hammer-beam roof, had witnessed coronation banquets and treason trials. Nearby rose Westminster Abbey, its Gothic towers dominating the riverside, the spiritual heart of the nation where monarchs were crowned and the great were laid to rest. Between Westminster and the city lay Whitehall, the sprawling palace that served as the principal residence of the Stuart kings. Here the business of monarchy was conducted, petitions heard, ambassadors received, policies debated and decided. The Banqueting House, designed by Inigo Jones, introduced a new architectural language to London, its classical proportions a dramatic departure from the Gothic and Tudor styles that still dominated the cityscape. Yet this same building would witness one of the most shocking moments in English history. On a cold January morning in 1649, King Charles I stepped through a window of the Banqueting House onto a scaffold erected below and was executed before a stunned crowd, the first and only time an English monarch would be judicially killed by his own subjects. East of the city stood the Tower of London, ancient fortress and symbol of royal power. In the 1600s, the tower served multiple functions simultaneously. It was a garrison housing soldiers and weapons, an arsenal where military supplies were manufactured and stored, a treasury containing the crown jewels, and a prison for those accused of treason and other high crimes against the state. Prisoners held in the tower knew they occupied a liminal space between judgment and execution, held at the pleasure of a power that could at any moment decide their fate. The Great Fire of 1666 would test London's resilience as nothing had before. Starting in a bakery on Pudding Lane in September, the fire spread rapidly through streets crowded with timber-framed buildings. A strong wind drove the fire westward, and for 4 days it consumed everything in its path. The heat was so intense that the lead roof of Old St. Paul's Cathedral melted and ran through the streets in molten streams. The medieval cathedral was reduced to a smoking ruin, its stones cracked and blackened beyond repair. The fire destroyed more than 13,000 houses, 87 churches, and most of the civic buildings within the old city walls. Thousands were left homeless, entire neighborhoods erased as though they had never existed. The Tower of London narrowly escaped destruction when the garrison used gunpowder to create firebreaks, demolishing buildings in the fire's path. The destruction was absolute, but it also created opportunity. Christopher Wren was appointed to oversee the reconstruction, and though his grand plan for wide boulevards was rejected, he did succeed in rebuilding St. Paul's Cathedral, creating the magnificent domed structure that would define London's skyline. Over the following decades, more than 50 churches rose from the ashes, their elegant spires transforming the cityscape. Building codes were reformed, requiring brick and stone construction rather than timber. The city that emerged from the rebuilding was more prosperous, more orderly, and more confident in its place at the center of an expanding world. Beyond the dense urban core, London's expansion continued throughout the century. Buckingham House, built on the western edge, stood as a private townhouse surrounded by fields and market gardens, decades away from becoming the principal royal residence. To the southwest lay Richmond Palace, a favored royal retreat where Elizabeth I spent her final days and died in 1603, her long reign ending in a chamber overlooking the Thames. The London of the 17th century was a city of stark contrasts and violent transformations. It was a place where royal power was displayed in magnificent palaces yet could be challenged and overthrown. It was a commercial metropolis whose wealth depended on global trade networks, yet its streets remained narrow and dangerous, its periodic outbreaks of plague a recurring nightmare. It was a city being pulled between its medieval past and a modern future, between organic chaos and emerging desires for rational design. What made London vital was its concentration of functions. It was simultaneously the seat of government, the center of commerce, the largest port in the nation, and the focus of cultural and intellectual life. The political struggles that convulsed the nation were fought in Westminster's halls and decided in London's streets. The economic forces transforming English society radiated outward from London's markets and counting houses. The city that survived the fire, that rebuilt itself in brick and stone, that weathered civil war and regicide and restoration, emerged from the 17th century transformed. The cramped medieval capital had become something larger, more complex, more capable of absorbing change and continuing to grow. Yet for all that would come later, the London of the 1600s possessed its own distinctive character, its own mixture of grandeur and squalor, opportunity and danger, tradition and innovation. The 17th century London left a legacy that extends far beyond its physical structures, most of which have long since vanished. It established patterns of urban life, demonstrated that cities could survive catastrophic destruction, and proved that even the most settled arrangements of power remained subject to change. The London that entered the 18th century was fundamentally different from the city that had greeted James I at its start, shaped by fire and war into something new while retaining threads of continuity reaching back through centuries. If you enjoyed this journey through history, please like this video and subscribe to The Living Past for more historical reconstructions.